Sounds good.
Hey, we're back with episode 2 on Gina Horkey, me, and my GLP-1 journey, which is commonly known as Ozempic or Mounjaro, a bunch of different brand name medications out there. Just trying to document this process because there is a lot of curiosity out there, both with people that qualify for the traditional medical approach or prescription, and then others that are curious but don't qualify from a BMI standpoint. So people like myself that are wondering about these benefits that we're hearing around decreased inflammation in the brain and the gut, and other positive kind of side effects that you could expect from something like this. So to set the stage for today, which I'm thinking will be short and sweet, but whenever I say that, it's not. I am 2 weeks in officially to the journey. So yesterday, which would be Wednesday, August 7th of 2024, I administered my third dosage. I am on semaglutide, and I am at 0.1 milligrams. So less than half of a dose that somebody would start at if they went into their general practitioner and qualified for this medication, which, to further unpack and clarify, most people are using it for weight loss, but that is not the main benefit that I'm looking for or what it has been shown to create in others. And Jason's here with me because it's more fun to have a conversation instead of just listening to me talk at you.
Yes,
Welcome
excellent.
back.
Well, thanks, Gina. So, how has it been progressing this week?
Good. So what I have found to be fascinating is that I have a human brain, which is confirmed for me on a daily basis. And like most other people, I want immediate results. I want things to be happening faster. So I found myself on a couple of separate occasions thinking, maybe I should increase my dose, right?
Sure.
But that goes against everything that I've set out to accomplish with this experiment, which is micro dosing. So
Right.
not trying to add more and more and more and more until I feel maybe negative side effects or faster quote unquote results. But really just staying in the lane. And when I had this thought, I was like 8 days in the first time or whatever, and then maybe 12 days in. And that's just not a long time to host an experiment with something. So I've had to kind of rein myself back in, um, and look at what am I trying to accomplish here. And um, so I'm staying the course with the
Okay.
same 0.10 milligram dose of semaglutide. And like I said, I had my third injection yesterday. So I'm in my third week. Um,
Sure.
and I was, looking at like how quickly do people get results? And that was a question that came to my mind, and that maybe people that might be viewing this are asking too. And, from the course that I took, around that 90-day mark is really where you'll be able to assess some changes. And that's also about the time that people that are on the traditional dose and prescription that get ramped up really quickly tend to like maybe have a plateau or like a bonking moment where they'll have like the negative side effects enter their lives. So it was kind of like smooth sailing. They've seen results until that point, and then something kind of crashes for whatever reason. So all of that to say is I'm trying to think about, okay, this is like a 6-month experiment, but I'm really focused on like the first 90 days. And I think I shared with you what I thought I was going to do from this whole cycling and taking a break last time. So I have a prescription for this semaglutide. I have one for tirzepatide, which are two different versions of GLP-1's. And then I was going to go from 1 month on some semaglutide, 1 month over here to tirzepatide, and then 1 month off. And, I'd be open to having this conversation and maybe poking some questions at me. But I was thinking, well, maybe I should do the 90 days of the semaglutide first and then potentially transition over.
Well, I think the most important part on any experiment, right, is to figure out your sprint or your control period that you want to do it for. So I don't recall in our last conversation if we established that, but it's, recapping what you were just saying there, it sounds like it's a 6-month window that you're trying to look back at here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really shooting in the dark for all of this, right?
Yeah.
I'm wanting
Right.
to see some sort of long-term health benefits and not make too drastic of changes in a short period of time to get short-term unsustainable results and
Yeah,
potentially unwelcome negative side effects from that.
sure.
So, and you know, part of it is too, just like the way that my brain works. I'm like, oh, okay, where would we be around the first of the year? Now that's not exactly 6 months from when I started that journey, but it's approximately within that window of time. And so it's
Yeah,
kind of just a good, time frame for me to be like committed to something, not feel like it's too long to be able to see some change, but not too short where I don't give myself enough time to see it either.
yeah. It's a good agile type um, sprint or race, I guess. And so if you're planning on cycling, as you mentioned, it sounds like you'd go through I mean, each of the two different peptides you'd use twice, right? And then so it's really a 5 month sprint, because if you're really going peptide one for a month, peptide two for a month, and then a break off of it
Yeah. So that was
before
my
you,
original plan last week, but in my mind, and I can definitely get medical advice with the person that's overseeing my prescription, is I was
Mhm.
thinking, well, maybe it makes sense to, because there's no real like journey that has been laid out for me. So even though I took kind of a high-end masterclass on the subject matter, you know, because of her being a medical professional that's not overseeing my care, like she's not giving out a prescription or dosage plan to anyone, nor should she
Sure.
be.
Yep,
So I am working with a practitioner, but this is an experiment for me. And this is really an experiment for him too, because it's not something that he has this kind of history and body of evidence around. He is, I believe, using these with patients, but not in this micro dosing philosophy experimental approach.
sure. Well, I would think whichever you decide, though, the importance is to see it through the window, unless there's
Yeah,
a reason to abandon it. Mostly health
for
related.
sure. Yeah.
Um, and so maybe that's the first way to peel it back, is look at the pros and cons, not cons from a negative sense, but just from your thought experiment here, what you're working on, of what it looks like if you did 90 days versus just 30 days on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you
And the
might not
reason that
find,
my thought process has gone there is I don't want to increase the dose, but I'm
yep,
also not seeing external positive benefits, uh, like measurable ones, I would say, nor am
so
I
2
seeing
weeks
negative
in,
consequences from 2 weeks, really. My third dose, but I'm really just 2 weeks of it in my system, right?
okay. So
Yeah.
that's what we were going to dive into a little bit more. So changes that you've seen, notice, so physical changes, you just kind of led into that. You have not really noticed any.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to see where I documented um day one of semaglutide would have been on July 25th, and we're on August 8th right now. So weight wise, I'm within a pound of that. I had eaten out like Chinese food the night before, so that tends to have a lot of sodium, and it was higher than the weight that I had been anyways. And I did do my body fat again, and it's slightly higher, but I also normally would do it in the morning on an empty stomach, and just my own schedule wise, I ended up doing it after several hours of consuming fluids and breakfast and stuff
Yep,
like
but if we have to qualify it like
that.
that, it's
Yeah,
not
it's like,
it's not real life, right? So real
yeah,
life we should see the delta or the changes just when we go measure almost at any point.
yeah,
It shouldn't matter.
yeah.
So
So I would say from like, if we're looking at body mass, and that includes weight on the scale as well as the difference between the amount of muscle and fat that I have on my body, we're at net no change,
net,
which is
okay.
fine.
Yeah, right. Because we're microdosing and that wasn't the primary aspect that we're trying to measure here. So
Right.
what about some of the other things? What about the mental health side? How has your motivations been? How has your hedonistic desires been? Like
Yeah.
where are things at?
So like I still like sugar, turns out,
Mhm.
and that hasn't changed from last week nor from the beginning. I do feel like maybe it's a little bit more controlled, but it's not like I'm completely turned off by it, but I also maybe am not like super fixated on it either. Whereas I would say that I would have a craving and it would kind of stick with me until I satisfied that urge in the past. And
Mhm.
maybe I'm also going about it a little bit differently where I'm not like totally restricting it from my life. I'm trying to increase the amount of like healthy things. Like we're really going organic. I've always been kind of shooting for a higher protein diet, but definitely more whole foods based. And then if I'm getting in those good things, then, there's an allotment for exceptions, which is stuff that doesn't basically add any nutritional value or fuel to my
Mhm.
body, to my life. It's just something that I want because it tastes good. So, um, I think there is a change there, but it's not like so stark that it's a 1 to 10 or all or nothing kind of approach.
How about in your motivation for workout? I know you're pretty physical, always
Yeah.
train. Have you noticed any change in your desire or lack of desire to see things through?
I mean, if anything, it's been on the negative side, but again, lifestyle is attributed to so many different factors. I'm, on my cycle this week, we have company, which changed my actual day-to-day schedule and what I'm trying to do as far as fitting all of the pieces in. Um, so I think I've only worked out once this week and I'll get my second lift in today. So it's down a little bit, which for a client, if I was coaching them, and they were a new lifter, that would not be ideal. But I've been at this for a while, and there's a lot of research that shows that you can maintain your strength with as little as one strength training session, like every 2 weeks. So I'm
Okay.
not like worried about it, although it's something that I do enjoy when I get into doing it. And there's those benefits that I enjoy afterwards, whether it's a pump or the endorphins that are being released. There's definitely like the mental health benefits of physically working out your body. Step-wise, though, I'm still on the high end of things. I did buy one of those weighted vests. So people call walking with a weighted vest rucking, because we have to have terms for all the cool new fads.
Nice.
And mine is 12 pounds. I gifted one of my clients one that she has a much smaller frame than me, 8 pounds. But I've been wearing that while I've been training clients, and then I did wear it for a walk the other day. So even that, even though it's not like in the gym lifting barbells or dumbbells, it's creating extra resistance on my frame as I'm just moving my body. And it's
Yep.
also kind of fun because once you take it off after moving around doing activities of daily living for an hour or two, like you feel the difference. And if you've ever
Yeah.
lost any weight, sometimes because it's so gradual, you don't really realize how much extra weight you were like carrying around on a day-to-day basis. So it's gives you some perspective in that way too.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Um, Peeling back a little bit about the lack of changes.
Yeah.
uh, we never really touched on this before, but what is the expectation? Like, what's the ramp up period in under a traditional dosage and what your understanding of your microdosing would be?
Yes. So in a traditional dosage, and I should have,
That's fine if you don't remember or have it up in front of you.
I feel like it is like you start at your 0.25 milligrams and then I think the max is like 2.4. So it's significantly higher. That'd be like 10 times in
Yeah.
between, right?
I was more implying not so much what the actual dosage they're giving you is more of like certain medications. You take your Prilosec if you want your proton pump inhibitor, right? You have a certain effect by taking one. Okay.
Mm, yeah.
Um, but if you take it over a course, the impact is many X of the impact of just taking the one.
Right. Yeah.
Is
And I've
that
been
some
thinking
type of
about that too, as that one part of my brain is like, hey, you should maybe increase your dose. I was like,
uh,
well, think about the half-life and that cumulative effect of this building up on my body, right?
well, yeah, and the way the receptors work. And I know there's a bit of give and take here because part of the reason that you want to cycle is you don't want your body to become too accustomed to this
Exactly.
external exogenous source coming in and
Yeah.
binding with these receptors and such. But at the same time, if you haven't discovered or your body hasn't discovered the efficiency of it and figured out how to do it, you're not receiving the benefit of the binding of the receptors.
I know. And this kind of just like a lot of thoughts that I've been having recently is around medicine and all of us being kind of an experiment of one because we can't take two people, even if they're maybe similar frame or whatever, and assume that they're should be treated exactly the same because there's so many external irregularities or changes or differences between the two of them. And so I'm kind of this type A wired human being that likes to have this perfect, you know, this about me already based on our numerous conversations over time. But I want to have like this perfect plan and somebody just give me the rules. And, you know, for this experiment, for example, there isn't really a plan that I'm working. I'm kind of coming up with it on my own with, you know, help from that practitioner, but really just kind of feeling it out over time and trying to be as in tune with my body as possible. And then utilizing this experience that we're doing right now in order to like journal it so that I have some record of how I think that I'm feeling or changes that I'm noticing and things like that. So I don't think that really answered your question, but I just have really been finding it kind of fascinating that somebody listening is just going to want to know what to do potentially too. First of all, they want to know, hey, does this work?
Right.
If it works for her, then maybe it'll work for me. And then number two is like, okay, give me the step-by-step plan then on exactly what you did so that I can replicate it. And this is probably a good time for a disclosure and disclaimer that I'm not a medical professional, that I'm just conducting an experiment, that this is just for informational and potentially educational and entertainment type of experience or, you know, process, whatever, this video. That's the purpose of it. It's not for me to tell you what to do with your health. So what was your question? And let's see if that answer at all came
I
into
was
play.
just curious if you knew off the top of your head or recalled at all what the ramp up time to the response of using the peptide is. And it's not, I mean, is it one, like some things you take it and there's an instant, like you get 100% of the impact, right, when you do it. Other things you need to make the pathways, the binding of the receptors, everything more efficient.
Yeah.
And some things have the half-life like you're talking about, like you get more in your system. So it's not that the pathways are becoming more efficient, it's that there's more in your system built up over time, right?
Yeah. So that is not something that I'm super well versed on, but you know, just the quick Google search just says that it takes about 2 weeks for semaglutide in particular to start working in the body. That's just one source. We all know that you can't just read something on the internet and decide that it's totally true. And, you know, if the research is done on people that are starting at the standard dose of 0.25 and then ramping themselves up to over 2 milligrams within 60, 90, 180 days, like, isn't that kind of hard to find out? Because don't you really need to have the same dose for a prolonged period of time? What's your understanding of it?
Well, potentially, again, it's just like, how do I want to say this? You have the woods in your backyard, right? And you want to
Yeah.
go make a trail down to the lake or whatever, right? And the first time you go walk it, you take the path of least resistance and the stuff's kind of working. But the more times you walk it and you clear a few more things and do things, it becomes more efficient, more easy. And so there's different ways to measure that. I don't know, like in our analogy, my terrible analogy that I'm using, maybe you measure it in how fast you can walk down there or
Right.
that. So not being well versed in this particular substance and how this all works. I mean, I'm sure there's ways of them to measure how efficient and effective it's being.
I think this is an area that Gina needs to dig into becoming a little more versed in. But again, the internet in a quick search says that its peak concentration is 3 days after injection, and steady state is achieved by week 5 when injected once weekly. So provided that's accurate information that's coming from a governmental article source, you know, then each week that I take it, so tomorrow would be that peak concentration after my injection. And then I really am not quite halfway through the period of steady state.
Well, and you said before that you typically don't start to see any changes from the first source that you saw, whether it's reliable or not, for 2 weeks. So that matches empirically what you're witnessing because you're about 2 weeks into it and you've been stating you haven't seen much change with stuff. So in a certain sense,
that's what kind of makes me want to flirt with the idea of getting to 90 days on that same dosage of the same medication, because if this is also saying 5 weeks, you know, and I stop at 4 and then switch over to another one, which is all, you know, So,
Well, so it's interesting though. It's because it's what are you trying to do? Are you trying not to? So is it the negative or the positive? Are you're taking these for the positive effect? Is the whole idea of cycling it so that your body doesn't become too efficient in that pathway or
yeah,
too responsible? So
yeah,
stopping it at 4 might be the right thing if depending on what your objective is, right?
yeah. And
So
maybe that's what I further needed to define so that I have some empirical data to be able to support whatever the conclusion is. I
yeah,
mean, to kind of go back to the last video, the goal is that I wanted to use myself as an experiment so that if I had clients that were utilizing this substance, which I think that I will over time, I from what I have encountered so far, it's my hypothesis that this GLP-1s are not going away anytime soon, right?
right.
They might be regulated a little bit differently, and there might be something politically that we aren't anticipating at this moment. But if the research that we've seen so far is accurate and our modern way of living is not going to change on its head and go back 100 years, which I really don't think that it's going to do, then they're around to stay. And so I want to see what my experience is like and using it in the kind of the minimum dosage possible to get some sort of results, and mainly from mental health, and then inflammation. But I would love the side benefit of 5 to 10 pounds of actual fat loss.
Sure. All right. So wrapping up the conversation then, what do you think, what's the expectation or what are you hoping to see uh, the next time we chat?
So I was also thinking about that because if I'm not seeing a ton of change in between a week to week basis in the first 2 weeks, like maybe it makes sense to come back around in 2 weeks from now to
Yep.
see what
But
changes.
what is the delta? Like what is your hope that you're shooting for? Because you talked about being a little distraught at what you've seen. You were hoping for a little more
I mean, distraught is probably a strong word.
fair enough. My choice of bad words. So
No, it's okay. Just meaning that it's not, for me personally, this isn't like a life or death kind of a thing. I'm not thinking that this is gonna like quote unquote save me or whatever,
yeah,
right? Because I'm already metabolically healthy. It's
right.
just that like a lot of us, I have a goal that I'd like to work towards. And the more energy that I can have and the more stable like mood and the more clarity in my thinking, and the more that I can control for things that I do see cause long-term negative consequences to health, like that's amazing because I'm doing
Yes.
it in my control. I'm being responsible for myself and for my personal health.
Yep. No, it's wonderful. So I'm just trying to set a little baseline. I know we
I know
talked.
you want to have things to measure against, and I'm all for it, except for I feel like I don't have the perfect answer to it because I'm seeing all of the possibilities and I need to maybe.
Yep. And we don't need to have it perfect, and it's not like a right or wrong test. It's just that, when you ask people, how was your day? We started our conversation. How is it going? When you give a generic or simple answer, then there's no way to measure between, oh, it's good. Well, is it good compared to how good it was
Yeah.
last week? Or is it, so
And that is why I'm measuring my weight and measuring my body fat. And then the other side of that will be measuring strength as far as the number of pounds that I can lift in the gym, or I've got that little strength tester as far as grip strength. So those are physically things
yep,
that I can measure and create data points for. I think the other things that we've talked about was around sleep and energy, mental clarity, um,
desires, the sugar desires and
and
things.
the
Yeah.
cravings. Yeah.
Mm,
And so at this point, like there might be a small amount of change, but what is our baseline? Sleep with assistance is like an 8 out of 10. Energy is low this week, but there might be some other factors. So I would say that I'm a 5. I'm really trying to listen and like taking naps, which is not usually a part of my vocabulary. And then mental clarity, I mean, maybe like a 7. I think there's always room for improvement there. Um, and the cravings, let's give that a 6 because it's still very present, but it's not like so loud.
Sure.
Was there any that I missed?
No, I mean, that's good. And I guess I was even more pressing for what you were hoping to see. And you can do it in
I
numbers.
want tens. I want like optimal. We won't say perfection, but I'll say optimal, as high as I can move the needle without maybe too big of sacrifices.
Sure. But let's say, so in this 2 weeks, you made, it was
Oh, and
noticeable
in
enough.
2 weeks, I'm not expecting a 10.
Okay, yeah. So in
Yeah.
this 2 weeks, it was the movement was noticeable, not enough for you to start having rethinking your plan a little bit. Not saying you're going
Right.
to, but the point was it didn't go necessarily the way, whatever it was that you
It
thought
was
didn't.
not a magic pill that occurred overnight.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so now that we just did a little quick research, had a little conversation about it and determined like, oh, well, that makes sense. 2 weeks is kind of where you start to notice stuff, right?
Yeah.
So with that two bits of reference, in the next time we talk, let's say it's 2 weeks from now, like
Mhm.
kind of where do you feel like what would be at this moment in time in 2 weeks if you saw like, oh, it'd be great if X, Y, and Z was happening, or I was starting to see X, Y, and Z. Do you have any way to quantify that or any thoughts in your mind where you say, oh yeah, this is winning, this is great, this is going the
Yeah.
right direction?
I would say that like right now, I fit some sort of sugar into my life. So yesterday I had a pack of M&Ms and also a little bit of dark chocolate after dinner. So I would like that to not be a daily occurrence, but not because I'm like so willpower restricting it, but more
Okay,
because I don't feel like it's um, as much of a craving and an urge and desire on my part. So I think that is something that we could measure. Um, and then the mental clarity, because that's something that the gal that I was learning from in particular mentioned is such a big benefit. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with maybe energy levels. So I'd like to see some change there. And this is one way that I could see measuring it, but I ingested so much content for so long now, both via like an audio and written, meaning I'm reading the content, that I find that my brain doesn't pay as good of attention. And I don't know if that's also because we're in this, world of short attention spans, but I don't consume short form content. So it's books and it's long
mhm,
form podcasts. But I feel like my brain has desensitized and stopped
sure,
listening as well. So that
sure,
could be an area that maybe it would come back from. I don't know.
sure. Nope, these are great. We're just trying to set some expectations, right? So
Mhm. So
so
being
that
able to like really concentrate, focus, and get the meaning behind like the words that I'm reading.
okay, so some reading or reading focus
Focus
and
and
clarity.
cognition, like being able to retain that information.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to share or that you think we should dive into?
No, I mean, when I came into today, I was like, this is going to be kind of a non-update update, but we're always unpacking something. And then I think, based on what we unpack today, it shows the opportunity to further define potential baselines and ways to measure, but then also like looking at some of the other research that exists as far as expectations.
Sure. Nope,
Yeah.
I think that's great. Yeah, because that becomes the hardest thing when you don't have a set experiment here. Then
Hmm.
you have to temper your expectations, or maybe not temper, that's the wrong word, but you have to manage the expectations. Like, what are we expecting?
Right. Yeah, we
Um,
have to have something. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to be aware of potential changes. The last thing I would like to leave people with that I know I harped on in the first video is that GLP-1s in and of themselves are not a standalone answer to weight loss or all these other things. They need to be combined with lifestyle changes. So if you're not strength training, if you're not actively moving your body on a day-to-day basis, i.e. 8 to 12,000 plus steps a day, if you're not eating whole foods and enough protein and hydrating yourself and sleeping and taking care of your general well-being, like this isn't going to be the end all be all cure. It needs to be layered in with other healthy ways of taking care of yourself.
right. No, and that's great stuff. And in a future call at some point, I would love to dive into that a little bit more because, everyone conceptually can understand what good health is and conceptually can understand what they should be doing, but then actually changing your lifestyle and doing it becomes rather difficult. And then it actually becomes a negative reinforcing thing because you set up yourself to fail with these wrong expectations, you don't execute, and then you feel bad about it, and then it's this negative cycle. So it would be interesting to peel back what more of those basic blocks are and where you can get your small wins, the quick wins, have real life expectations, still get the impact, maybe not the ultimate impact, maybe not the perfect impact, but get enough where you set the flywheel on the positive experience going in the right direction, because the actions beget the feelings. And so if you can start taking some action, whether it's the passive modality of the injection, which leads to the good feeling of the exercises, you know, that you want to, now let's add the next stuff. Yep. And go that way. It just becomes a little more holistic and encompassing in reality versus clinically on a piece of paper saying, well, it's so easy, just do these things every day.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that then speaks to meeting yourself wherever you're at, right? So like a lot of people will come across like 75 hard. You've seen that before, right? Where you're exercising twice a day, this many minutes outside, reading this many pages of a book, consuming this much water, no alcohol, and whatever, following a diet plan, I think are the general like requirements. And, you know, somebody that is doing 90% of those things already, to adopt the last 10% is maybe realistic for them, but somebody that's doing 0% or less than 25%, that might be too big of a change and jump for them to not only make a change for one day, but for 90 whole days consecutively. So I think you meet yourself where you're at and maybe shooting for that incremental change or 1% different or whatever too, so that you can give yourself a fighting chance of starting, but staying started and in motion, and then seeing compounded return over time. Because ultimately the game of health isn't won in a single 6-month experiment even, right?
Right. Well, that's the whole point, because it requires a lot of energy and discipline to just stay on a 6-month experiment, and then even to keep the routine that you decide for your 6-month experiment, right? And you can't, you know, if that requires a certain high level amount of energy and discipline, that can't be the expectation for the rest of your life. You know, you have to find where it can meet, where you can just live your life. You know, hopefully you create good habits, create lifestyle choices that get integrated into just living life. But it can't drain the battery.
Right, where all of your resources are going here, and then you're no longer showing up on the home front or in your career or even in like your hobbies, which you get joy and energy back from.
Yes. Yep. You got it. So
gosh, we're so smart.
All fabulous, fun stuff. So, well, very good. Well, I look forward to the next conversation.
Yeah, maybe in 2 weeks. I think that's what we should plan on.
Sounds great.
All right. Bye.
Bye, Gina. Thanks.